Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Shells and Shadows. Today, I have a guest with me, Daniel Steele. Daniel, how are you?
I'm good, Yoda. How are you?
I'm good. And so we met because of Yovel.
Yep.
You're his coach at Easton, and
Yep.
you've taught him and trained him for his competitions.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been involved in the jiu-jitsu scene for close to 16, 17 years now and have met a lot of cats through that walk of life, but very few are like Yovel. And he asked me to do his 1% podcast. And it just was an opportunity I wanted to take advantage of. And that's kind of like how we linked up.
Yeah, and something that really stood out to me from that episode that I recorded for you guys was the lessons that we can take from martial arts, jujitsu in particular, and apply to our lives to help us become like well-rounded, disciplined people.
Yep.
That's I grew up doing karate. I didn't really play sports when I was younger, and so I did that for about 8 years, and probably can't tell you what I learned except for the fact that show up on time. Um, you put in the right work and you gain respect from your instructors, and they teach you and help mold you along the way.
Yeah, a lot of um, philosophies, a lot of guidelines that can help build yourself as a young individual. I think that was a big reason why I was so attracted to it, like in my early 20s. Kind of came up from like a broken home a little bit, single mom, parents divorced at a really young age. And I grew up in the Boulder area. So like wasn't exposed to like a lot of like hardships because Boulder's pretty sheltered within itself. But um, got into my own mischievous activities and throughout the years, just kind of was like walking a path in life that had like no real end goal in sight. And just one day I stumbled across an opportunity to start training in jiu-jitsu, and it provided a foundation for me that I didn't even know what it was at first, right? It's kind of like you said, you get in, you have a couple coaches, professors, and that like level of mentorship starts to grow. Next thing you know, it's like, you're building not just yourself up physically, but also mentally. I think like one of the biggest things jujitsu teaches you is like the idea of like perseverance and overcoming. Like life is always going to throw like a giant bag of shit at you. Pardon for the French, but that's jujitsu every single day. There's like somebody there who's giving you a really hard time and like maybe a technique you can't quite master, or it takes you longer than you were hoping to. And um, I feel like just from jujitsu alone, like there was just an um, a tremendous amount of growth within myself as like a young man. And I just started asking myself if like I'm putting this amount of time in every single day on the mats, couple hours, like why can't I put that effort towards like my relationships, my professional career, like kind of rounding out who I am as an individual, and making myself like somebody that I'd be proud of when I look back at like the end of my life. I think oftentimes we hear about like, oh, when you're on your deathbed, you don't want to be looking there and be like, I wish I did this or I wish I did that. And I feel like jujitsu has really helped me like grasp what I want in life and be able to like carve a path to those goals that I'm working towards still.
Sure. Yeah, I think back to my old karate studio, and there was a quote on the wall that said, "A black belt is a white belt that never quit."
100%.
And again, like I don't know what I can say I can show for those 8 years, but that quote is I still remember it. And I was, like a young kid, probably 6 when I started, and that quote rings in my head sometimes because there's a truth to that, and I'm sure that that lesson shows up in life for you, but you've learned how to overcome challenges and persevere through your practice.
Yes.
I think that's the beauty of finding a skill or a particular area of life and devoting yourself to it. Is if you want to gain mastery, you're going to have to overcome a plethora of trials and tribulations.
I couldn't agree more. One of the common sayings that you hear in jiu-jitsu and other martial arts too is how long does it take the average person to get to black belt? And the quick response is, well, an average person never becomes a black belt, right? Because it takes an extraordinary individual to dedicate themselves on such a level that they're gonna make sacrifices maybe in the short term, but within those sacrifices comes like an idea of excellence and structure that comes behind it. And I think when you look at like some of the most successful people and people who have like really strong families and communities, they're really structured in what they do. Like their approach every single day, they're very consistent. Not to say you can't be consistent and find success, but oftentimes like you need a routine that can really put you in like like a flow state almost. And That's where you find like your best creative self and your ability to kind of envision what you truly do want when you're within that like consistent construct of day to day. And yeah, so life is interesting, and the mantras in martial arts are like they're never ending.
Yeah. So in Judaism, there's this idea of having to find a balance between these two concepts of chesed and gevura, which one is like loving kindness and the other is like discipline.
Hmm.
Think about it like in the archetypes of like the mother and the father. One is love, but in the form of like molding someone
Mm.
in a certain direction, and the other is more unbounded, more of like the mother figure. How, as an instructor in jujitsu, do you find that balance in motivating your students, but also, giving them and offering that discipline that is rooted in love?
Yeah, I think a lot of it just comes down to consistency, right? Like I wasn't always an instructor in jiu-jitsu. For the longest time I was just a student. And an opportunity presented itself probably like 6 or 7 years ago for me to start teaching in front of the community I had been a part of and grown up in as a young instructor. And when I had the opportunity to start teaching, you want to make sure you're at like the forefront of like the technique, but you also want to make sure like you're a well-rounded individual. So it's like a lot of the toxic traits, that you're already starting to flush out as you're becoming a young adult, turning into like what you would consider like your best version of yourself. You start to eliminate those. And I feel like you kind of want to lead from the front of the pack, right? Like you don't want to walk or talk the walk and not walk the walk. So it also helps when you have mentors around who you can look up to, who you're learning from still to this day. And they kind of lead by example themselves, right? They're not the type who just show up just to collect the paycheck. These are individuals that literally live within this motto of like, being a good husband, being a good friend, being a good community member, being the best version of yourself on the mat as well. And so I just feel like it was just kind of what was asked of me by like the universe, right? And I feel like when you're a teacher, you eventually show like your students or your children or your fellow community members that like it's not that I had this idea of like I wanted to be this person, but more so that like all the paths and the stars sort of aligned, and it helped like just form this person that is me or is my teacher or is your teacher. And they're just doing the best that they can with the circumstances that they're within, and they understand that they're a role model and somebody that is constantly like being looked at. And so like you want to make sure that you're not taking advantage of people who are young and looking for people to be mentored by. um, so it's long answer, but I think it's
No,
just kind of
yeah.
like the role within itself just kind of asks and demands it. And so you just try to do your best with it that you can.
Yeah, and I'm sure you also learn a lot from the people that you teach.
Oh, absolutely.
That's a big part of what it means to be teachers, to learn from your students.
Yeah.
Um, as when we're first students, we don't realize that until we have an opportunity to teach, and we're like, oh, I don't need to know everything. I'm actually learning more now as a teacher in some ways, right? I'm sure you've had moments where students have like inspired you or taught you new things, and you're like, I didn't realize that even from my greatest teachers. Any like particular people that have offered you those moments of learning?
I wouldn't say like I could think of something like right off the head, but I do know and share that experience all the time. Like when I'm displaying like a technique in a class, and you have to realize like in jiu-jitsu, there's like thousands of different variables that go into any specific sequence and exchange between two dynamic athletes. Body types are a big part of it too, right? My jujitsu is geared towards my body type, my length, my height, my mobility, my ability to be like flexible in certain areas, and not everybody shares those same attributes. So sometimes when I'm teaching, I'll be showing a move that like something that I really favor within like a systematic approach. I try to look at it as like, they react this way, we take advantage of it like this, and then maybe they react in this other pathway, and we start going down this pathway. And then you let the students break, and they go, and during the drilling session of the class they start working on things, and you'll see cats who, and I call my students like cats. You'll see the cats out there like on the mats, and they're operating and they're trying to adopt what you're showing, but they're also trying to make it work for their body type. So sometimes like you're demonstrating, and then you let them go drill, and then you're in a little bit of an observation mode to see like, okay, yeah, so like this body type like doesn't necessarily have like the range of flexibility that like I would play within this sequence of movement, but like watching them like kind of reinvent that and like maybe they can't bring their leg like high up and over, but it's easier for them because they got a little more mass or they're a little longer in the limbs that they leverage something differently. So when you teach it next week, you can talk about like the dynamics of body types because you've watched your students like troubleshoot it for you. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. It's almost like a dance in many ways between the two people
Yeah.
that are fighting.
Yeah. It's this constant, like I look at it as two live algorithms when you're actually watching two athletes play with each other, like compete, like train with each other, and they're both putting data sets on the table. And those data sets, they're not static, they're dynamic, right? And the data sets, because of that dynamic nature, one person is always trying to stay ahead of the other one's algorithm, right? And so you see this like sometimes somebody's way more skilled than another person. So you see their algorithm overwhelm their algorithm and they everything falls apart. But when you see two athletes that are near skill level, near same size and body types, you see this dynamic dance and you see like problem solving at its highest level. And I think that's why the sport is so attractive, is because it's this never ending dilemma of problems that you can't seem to always have an answer for, but that's what you're working towards. And I feel like that's why it's attractive is you take those lessons in jujitsu and you can bring it into life. And you're like looking at life as this giant algorithm that's always throwing you problems and sequences, and you're trying your best to solve and overcome those.
And that seems what you said to me about how, what people bring to the table and how they compete with one another. That seems like an algorithm for an ideal partnership in any area.
100%.
We think that relationships are supposed to be like perfect and easy, but an ideal relationship, whether it's one with like a spouse or on the mat, seems to be you're with someone who brings like a sweet spot of challenge, but not enough to where you feel fully defeated all the time, enough to where it pushes you enough to grow, right? So if I'm operating at a level of 7 out of 10 right now in my strength and my ability, and someone comes and they're at like an 8 or a 9.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe at a 10 I would feel too defeated, but at an 8 or a 9 I might gain that like motivation and that will to defy where I'm at and level up, so to say.
Yep.
In relationships, a partner isn't just someone that you have a good time with and is enjoyable to be around. It's sometimes it's adversarial, but it's beneficially adversarial.
Yeah. I saw a good quote recently, and I'm going to butcher it a little bit, but it was basically talking about like, it was a question asked and an answer. It was like, are all marriages and relationships in general, shouldn't they be 50-50? And like the top answer was, well, it's actually 60-40, and both sides should be striving to be the 60, right? So both of them are trying to put in because they care that much more about their partners than they do themselves, right? And I feel like in jujitsu, it's kind of the same way. You get to a point where your skill set's good enough, and you have to start to approach the sport within almost a selfish like approach. But that selfish approach is it's not just for you; it's also to push your training partners and your fellow community members. And if you take that just be outside of the jiu-jitsu room, it's like why wouldn't you do that with like people that you hang out with in a day-to-day life? Like you see one of your best friends slipping in an area, you got to really push them to get back like onto the good path and off the off beaten path. And it's just a quote that like really resonated with me is like the 60-40 instead of 50-50.
Because it's not when it's 50-50, you feel okay, I've met my requirement. Now I'm good. Now I can, receive the other 50%. But like in striving for more, you're never settling. There's always more growth
Yeah,
or more effort to be putting in.
absolutely. It's like we're all constant works in progress. I mean, I wish it was as easy in life where it was like in a video game, you were able to power up and you got the 10 out of 10 in your power, and that was it. But I feel like life is like this limitless bar. We're all trying to level up our abilities, whether it's physical, mental, spiritually, and there's never a point of stopping. Like you should always be seeking to like improve yourself in any one of those realms.
So I want to shift the conversation a little bit now
Yeah.
towards men, specifically young men in today's age, where today young men um, are are often being told that they need to push down and suppress their many of their like instinctual drives, and something that's like a part of our animalistic self and our
Hmm.
physicality, where um, I'll lead with a quote. Jordan Peterson talks about how a man is supposed to be a monster,
Hmm.
not a rabbit, because a rabbit is helpless and offers nothing beneficial but helplessness to the world. But
Hmm.
a monster that has the potential for great things, including great evils, but is disciplined and controlled enough to take his energy and put it towards good. And I think about something that's so almost primal, like fighting and jiu-jitsu. And to me, I see that as an outlet for men to train and become disciplined and
Hmm.
channel that into a positive outlet or avenue. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, first, I love Jordan Peterson.
It's
I think
great.
he's a super intelligent psychologist, right? Isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And I think you see him all over social medias, and that's one of I've seen that quote. There's a quote from, oh gosh, the Roman times. I don't know who said it, but it's like no man should die without seeing like the limit or like the prowess of like which their body is capable of, right? And I think that feeds back into the quote you're talking about. Like we should know like what we are capable of as men, but we should also have enough discipline to kind of know that it's like I only need to go there with like certain scenarios, right? And I think that's like part of having a wide spectrum of experiences, right? There's going to be times where sometimes you're going to have to dip into your physical side, or then there's other times you're going to have to dip into your emotional intelligence. And I think Jordan Peterson highlights a lot of these things that are kind of like prevalent in our society today, right? Like I'm not one to like attack feminism or anything, but I believe in this cycle that is constant, which is hard times create hard men, right? Hard men create easy times create weak men create hard times. And we just there it is, right? Now you're in this circle. And I think we're in this time where we've been in the long peace since like post World War II, right? And now like most of the wars that we don't really get to see wars like World War II, Desert Storm, the Korean Wars. Most of the wars nowadays are like economical. And so people don't have a true understanding for the capacity of like evil through war. And I feel like we are in a society we're stuck in such a rut where we're like quick to complain about things that like are non-factors really. Like this idea that, and Jordan Peterson verbalizes much better than me, but like this idea of gender equality is like it's a very gray area. There we definitely want equality and opportunity, but there's physical things that women are better at, and there's physical things that men are better at. Men never bear a child. Women, or sorry, yeah, men never bear a child. Women meant to bear children, right? That's like a superpower within itself, right? But like men are very strong physically, probably more of like the labor force, the ones who are like doing the dirty work, and if shit hits the fan, going to war first, right? Until like a population is decimated, and then you have to dip into like the woman's population and stuff. So for me, it's a unique thing to watch like where we are in the world right now and see these like what I again I try not to be too harsh, right? I try to have an understanding for everybody in their walks of life, but I feel like there's a lot of people who take for granted for like all the things that we've been given in our current times with this long peace, and we're quick to just complain about things that are so minute, so small on the grand scale. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
that does make sense. I think the point is that everyone does have the freedom to choose how they want to live their lives.
Yeah.
The point is with men in particular, it's important to encourage men to not just like melt into the weakness that lead into dark times,
Yes.
but to reveal their inner power so they can use it for good and use it for better. Um, I can say, and Yovel is proof as a close friend of mine, that I don't feel cut off from the reality of war in our world,
Right.
where one of my close friends and other people like him that I know have risked their lives to protect their people.
Yes.
And he talks about a lot that to him, what it means to be a man is to be willing to do great harm to others for the sake of protecting those that he loves. And it's this balance of this great strength that could be used for bad, but he's using it from a place of only from a place of love. He's willing to do anything, and all men, should be willing to do anything to protect those that they love. Um, and that's something that's feared oftentimes today, I feel.
Yeah.
And when we fear that, it doesn't go anywhere, but it turns into shame and it goes dark. And I call this podcast Shells and Shadows. It becomes a collective shadow, this great strength that the man has potential for. And when we don't acknowledge it, it shows up in dark ways because we're not owning or we're not integrating it.
Could I ask you what's your opinion on the phrase toxic masculinity?
Um, I think that there are very, very, how do I want to phrase this? There are men in this world, and we can use extreme examples or people that we don't have even heard of that are capable of very terrible things and have done very terrible things. I think when we when we put a term like that out there and label it as bad, as like a side of the masculine that is bad, we forget that we're all human beings with the same capabilities as one another.
Mm-hmm.
So just as a man can be abusive and genuinely toxic, and there are, and we as men ought to stop that. Just as someone else can use their strengths for evil, so could all of we,
Mm-hmm.
because we all come from humanity. We have our human nature. And I would argue that instead of taking toxic masculinity and saying this is bad, we need to get away from it, we need to look at the causes of what is driving men to continue cycles of abuse,
Mm-hmm.
and to perpetrate great evils in our world.
Mm-hmm.
How can we would more address it at the root rather than saying you're a product of your society and it's bad. And that's something that I talk about with the men in my life, because I do see that it's a great struggle in our world, and that's how I choose to deal with it, is in my close relationships with other powerful men in my life.
Right. Yeah, I the reason I ask is like I'm always curious. Like I feel like some words are automatically like packaged together now. Like
Yeah.
when we talk about masculinity as like men, I feel like it's really easy to look at it and be like, oh, well, these are just being toxic masculinity. Like the two just kind of have this marriage right now, and I feel like they're really hard to separate in a lot of people's minds. And I feel like that's a part of like population's ideology, right? Like they're being programmed to not really be critical thinkers themselves. So that's kind of why I asked.
Yeah. And it's something that I've thought of when in preparing for our conversation today, and physical outlets where men can mold themselves into greatness.
Mm-hmm.
Greatness not in like a grand way, but in greatness as like I have fulfilled my greatest potential of what I could be. Um, those institutions and those programs, like a school, whether it's a jiu-jitsu school or, in the Jewish world, men go and some men go learn in yeshiva and they
Mm-hmm.
study Torah and texts and like
Mm-hmm.
great wisdom of philosophers. For other men, it's more physical.
Yeah.
It's like going to Easton and refining your skills in that way.
Yeah.
And that's what's important, to preserve those communities and those institutions that really foster that growth.
I agree. Yeah. I feel like our jobs as teachers is eventually to understand that like we're here to preserve this knowledge that's been accumulated and help pass it on in a way that it can be taken and improved upon, and I feel like all teachings are open for interpretation, but I feel like there is like a hard line to be walked. I feel like there is a certain foundation, like a floor to all teachings that like once you understand and master like the foundational side, the floor, you can really build any type of house or temple on top of that floor. And that's what I try to teach my students at all time is like once you become competent with like your foundations, like the way your jujitsu will look is going to be different than my jujitsu, and it's probably different or very similar in like philosophical teachings and religious teachings as well. It's like there's a foundation, and like after that, like the interpretations are really like up to the user, right? Like you're not signing a user agreement like you do when you sign up with Apple, but I feel like that's in my opinion like the number one job of a teacher is like to help build solid foundational base.
Yeah, and it's the job of the student to take it and, like you said, um, interpret it as you will, as
Mm-hmm.
interpret it in whatever way is most, beneficial to your current circumstances. Like teachings from even 20 years ago at this point, or philosophers that are we consider modern philosophers, it's our job to take those teachings and apply it to today,
Mm-hmm.
because the world is changing, and so is humanity, and
Yep.
men, women, everything's changing, and part of what it means to be a student is to know that you're upholding the responsibility. You bear this knowledge, you receive it, and you apply it as you will, as it is fit in the world.
Yeah. What's your thoughts on therapy?
So first, I think that, and as someone who's been in therapy a lot of my life,
Mm-hmm.
I think that it is it is necessary for some people who absolutely need the guidance. I also firmly believe that you can't help someone who does not already want to help themselves. I spent a year at a residential treatment center when I was 16, turning 17 years old in Utah. And I wasn't there for some of the other reasons other kids were, like substance abuse problems.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but what I did see was that the kids who turned their lives around were able to face the reality that life right now isn't what I want it to be, but it can be better. And I think that a job of a therapist should ought to be, um, to help the client and help the kid see their greatest potential themselves. Because if they themselves can't see it, then all you're doing is targeting surface level problems.
Mm-hmm.
Um, they need to want to change, and I'm still in touch with a lot of great guys who use that time to refine themselves at a really young age and turn their life in a completely different direction. And yet I also know other people who spent more time resisting what therapy had to offer
Mm-hmm.
when simply letting go could lead to great change.
Mm-hmm.
And I know people that have passed away because of their addiction, and people that have been in another prison system. And what's the difference? Some of them went in with a will to change and others didn't. Um, I think therapy can be absolutely beneficial, but a person needs to want that change.
Agree. Yeah, therapy is something I started recently. But I can't say I started recently. Did it like in my teenage years, and even as a younger child. I used to have like temper tantrums in the middle of class in like third and fourth grade, where I'd like go under my desk and like not come out. And the teacher tried to like reach in and grab me, I'd like bite them.
Yeah.
So at a young age, I had like a special environment in my elementary school, Flatiron's Elementary up here in Boulder, and I feel like it's really important for us to have the ability to dive into like why are we having this type of emotional reaction, and to understand that like emotions and the way we react are okay. Like it's okay to live through your emotions, but like understanding when your emotions are getting out of control and affecting others around you. I think that's something that's important to be able to diagnose and have some control over. And for me, that's like what therapy really helped me with, was like understanding why I'm reacting a certain way and what are the triggers and what are the signs that I can see within myself when a moment's happening.
Yeah. And part of that awareness is realizing also that, like, I am not my emotions.
True.
Um, when emotions will come up, and this is something I've learned through therapy as well, and just through my own like experience reading therapeutic books, so to say, when emotions come up, when we're aware of them, we think it's us. And it's not that
Mm,
it's not us, but
mm,
it's more so our experience. And if we can like bear witness to it, it's not a scary thing that we need to, suppress. There's this idea, and it's kind of fading away as we bring it to the light, out of the shadow, out of the darkness, that men shouldn't publicly, show or express emotion. And it's so silly to me because to not do so isn't noble, it isn't courageous. It's just simply the inability to even acknowledge that emotions are there.
Yep.
It takes greater courage to have them be there and to not identify with them, but to see it as, I'm a human being, and I have drives that tell me, oh, danger, fear. But if I don't sit with that and say, okay, what are my emotions trying to tell me? How can I view this as a teacher? Then I either live in the world on one extreme of acting out my emotions
Hmm.
in unconscious ways,
Hmm.
or suppressing them entirely in the macho man way of the past, where out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah, I this Bill Burr clip, like you know who Bill Burr is,
Yeah,
comedian, and I think some of the best comedians are like really emotionally intelligent comedians, and they almost make fun of like these little nuances of emotions that I think it's why it resonates with certain people stronger than others because they recognize that emotion and the fact that somebody can joke about it, and I feel like not to quote J. Cole here, but all good jokes contain true shit. It's like one of my favorite lines of his because I think it's true. But Bill Burr has this emotion. He has this emotional joke about like a man should just pack it down, and then eventually it all bubbles up and you blow up for an hour or two, and then you just start packing it back in. And I used to think like that was had a lot of truth to it, but I'm married, part of jiu-jitsu. I've realized I have like really strong friendships with a lot of my friends. And I feel like just having open dialogue about why you're feeling away is like a very healthy outlet. It doesn't always even have to be like with just one-on-one with a therapist. It could be like with the person that is making you feel a certain way. Letting them know like, hey, when you do this, like I react like in this manner and the underlying reasons behind it, it lets them understand like why you're reacting in a certain way, and it offers growth for them as well, right? Because maybe they're just oblivious to those actions that cause a reaction. And I just think it's really cool, like for myself as I've grown, like just being more open with my friends. Like I have a really tight knit crew of friends, and I used to just kind of be a bully and a dick to those guys. And one day they were like, "Dude, you're just such a douche all the time to us. Like, what's going on?" And I realized it was just like it was me, almost like a Napoleon complex. Like I was kind of like the smallest one of the crew, so I was always trying to like show my physical dominance. But it was like my friends were like, "Dude, you don't like that's we're not none of us care about that. Like, what's up? What's the reason behind that?" And I feel like it's just stemmed from like childhood, like being part of a clique in South Boulder that I grew up with, where I was kind of like always the smallest one and always got physically picked on. So then when I'd go hang out with my other friends, who were like my real tight knit group of friends, I would take from being picked on to being like the one who picked on them because they were more passive. They were like just laid back, cool kids, and
yeah,
I came from this like hyper aggressive like environment where we're all like athletes and we're always like competing for the status of alpha, not spoken, unspoken status of alpha in the group, but created some toxic relationships between the people that I really cared about. And I'm glad one day they confronted me about it. And like we had this like open group therapeutic thing in like our late teens. And it like showed me at the time, like, man, these guys are like my real friends, right? They're like, dude, like we like you, but we hate when you're like this. And it's like, what's going on there? I think it's a hard dynamic to have in today's world because of technology and how much we isolate ourselves, and a lot of people don't have like five, six close friends. They may have one or two at most, and they might only interact with them like a few days a week versus, I feel lucky all my friends are from Boulder. So like we all see each other multiple times a week. I mean, when we were growing up, it was like just before iPhones, just before like internet was totally saturated within everything we do. So like we would pick up a landline. Where are you at? I'll meet you at the skate park in 15 minutes. And we would be at the skate park till 10 p.m. And then we'd all go home. And, I know that there's still some traces of that in like the youth, but I feel like it's a lot different now just with the advent and the saturation of the internet and technology in our day-to-day lives. And so I guess what I'm alluding to is like this idea of openness with your friends and like being able to confront like the things that like aren't necessarily healthy within those relationships, and being vulnerable enough to hear what they're saying, and being strong enough to like dive into like why you're reacting in a certain way, and listening to like what they're trying to tell you, and changing your underlying behavior, because again, you care about their opinion, and their opinion is part of what makes you.
Sure. And if you don't have those people around you that are willing to call you out on that,
Mhm.
are they really truly your friends? I mean, part of, especially, in male relationships, um, like I read this. Have you read Wave the Superior Man?
No.
Really good book. There's a lot of interesting stuff in there, but there's little sections of just like bites of wisdom. And like in one section, it talks about how you're supposed to be living at your edge, right? You're supposed to be not living in comfort, but not beyond in extreme stress, beyond what you're capable of.
Hmm.
And men, good men around you in your circles should be able to point out to you when you're not living up to what you could be.
Hmm.
Um, I have those people in my life too.
Yeah.
I have a circle of guys who are willing to offer that to me and aren't just there for, the the fun times and the fraternity parties and the great fun of college, but are willing to say, "Hey, I think you could be better. I think you deserve better. I think people around you deserve better. Get your act together." And I say, okay, because they know me best. Sometimes more than I know myself, because we're limited. We can't always see
Yeah.
our flaws, but just as other people can point out our flaws that we can't see, they can also say, yeah, on the one hand, get your act together because you have so much to give.
Yes.
That's the piece to it.
Yes.
Um, I'm watching my little brother go through something similar right now where he's so emotionally in tune with himself. I mean, beyond some of the adults that I know,
Mhm.
and he's so in touch with his emotions and he's able to just communicate them so clearly with people. But he's at an awkward age of 14 where he's around guys that can't even begin to like hold space for that. And so like they call him gay and he doesn't have, he hangs around the girls in his grade because, they have more of a capacity for it. But, he's not wanting to hang around the girls all the time. And I feel it for him because I went through something similar and it wasn't until, around 17, 18, 19 where I started forming a really solid group of strong men who are looking to better themselves. And I guess I'm sharing this because I'm looking for ways to support him. Um, and I'm sure there's a lot of other guys who are in his position,
Yeah.
who are in my position that it's difficult. It's very difficult to be in.
Yeah, I would say like, and I think with any young person too, it's like the constant reminder of like what you're experiencing and feeling today is part of like just growth in general, and like school is so hard, right? Like the the inner workings of social structure and status and developing friendships at that age is it's probably the hardest it's ever going to be in life, because these other young men who are making fun of him, poking at him for being an emotionally intelligent young man, and somebody who's in tune with like how he feels inside and is able to communicate that. These are individuals who just haven't reached that yet, and some of them might never. Some of them might have this wall of you know call it self protection, that they don't want to show that side ever. And there could be a myriad of reasons for it behind it. But I would say, just for like from like a big brother perspective, like a guidance perspective, just remind them like, and the Tom Hanks, this too shall pass, right? Like this stage of your life is like, find the things that you do like about it and stick with those. And then the things that like don't feel healthy, that like don't make you feel good, like understand like they're temporary right now. Like it's not going to be the last of it. You're going to come across things in life that are going to make you uncomfortable or just give you an absolute disdain for the current scenario or situation you find yourself in, or a relationship you're potentially weighing whether you not want to continue with this person or not. And I think just through those experiences, it'll get him, and not just your younger brother, but like anybody who's young who approaches it with that, it'll paint the picture for them quicker on like the type of relationships they want. Where are they going to put their energy versus where they're not going to waste energy at all. Um, but man, that's like some of the stuff I struggle with, like advising younger people, because again, the way I grew up, like how old are you? You're
I'm 22.
22. Yeah, I'm 37. So that's a 15-year difference.
Yeah.
Like when I was hitting puberty and going into high school, you weren't even born yet. So like the things that I have experienced from then, like by the time you were in high school and hitting puberty and coming out of it, like the internet, I'm sure was just running through like I'm sure y'all had iPhones in your pockets. I'm sure y'all had, you know, dope laptops, like
I'm glad to have not had social media come around until I was like 13. So
a
you know,
couple
I
years.
had a good, 13 years without it. But yeah, it's different. It's very much different nowadays.
Yeah, and so like navigating that landscape is really hard. And that's why like I have a lot of respect and admiration for a guy like Jordan Peterson. I feel like he has a very good understanding, and obviously he's been doing it like his entire life in that
Yeah.
um, capacity. But I feel like that's why I'm always listening to the things he says. Sometimes long-winded, sometimes short-winded, but I feel like he has just a good capacity to like relay a message that's healthy and positive, and um, I don't know, turn your little brother on to Jordan Peterson.
Yeah.
I bet you he'll find some things and he'll be like, okay, yeah, this makes sense. But as far as providing him guidance, man, just let him know like this too shall pass, and like eventually you're gonna start to form those bridges. And who knows, maybe some of his best friends are actually females, and like that's perfectly okay too. And maybe you're his like male role model that's a mentor in his life until he gets to the next stage. I mean, he's what, a freshman, high school, eighth
Eighth
grade,
grade. Yeah,
eighth.
eighth
Yeah,
grade.
so man, he hasn't even experienced the true social statuses. Wait till he gets to, and again, maybe it's changed now, but wait till he gets into high school and he's a freshman. He sees all the seniors dating all the freshman girls, and it's like the girl he's got a crush on is dating a dude 3 years older than her, that drives him up a pole, and then there's a whole new thing to juggle.
Yeah.
I remember those years. I don't even know if it's like that anymore. The seniors still date freshmen. I don't know.
Sure they do.
I'm sure they do.
Well, I'm definitely going to share that with him. Because yeah, he has been struggling, and I'll probably share this episode with him too
Heck
because
yeah.
it's good stuff.
Yeah, man.
And yeah, I just hope that like I'm 22, and a lot of people that listen to this are either in their 50s or their 20s.
Yeah.
But I think it's a very where I'm at and in college, a little bit past high school, more into what am I doing here? What's my life going to be? I think it's important to have those teachers, like Peterson around,
Hmm.
because we're not here alone. We're not supposed to know everything, and having someone to maybe guide the way, whether it's a psychology teacher or an instructor in jiu-jitsu. Like I keep coming back to these parallels between these different types of learning, because it's all one learning experience, and whether it's through something that's active and high heart rate and physical, or sitting completely still in meditation,
Yeah.
you're learning nevertheless, and there's so many ways to go about that.
Yeah, and I think like you're alluding to it a little bit, but I think it's important to have multiple role models too, right? Like one of the dangers of like being a jiu-jitsu black belt, and this is something like I've learned over the last few years, and with the help of my mentor as well, Alex Huddleston, and some of my other professors that I learned underneath. But like we're black belts at jiu-jitsu. We're not black belts at finances. We're not black belts in therapy and psychology, and I've been asked a lot, like in my life as a teacher in that capacity, like, hey, I'm struggling with like finances. Like, what do you recommend? And for a while, until like I started learning the lessons, right? I'd be like, yeah, like buy Apple, buy Apple, buy Meta, you're good. Don't worry about it. Don't ever look at it again, right? And now it's like I know better. I know better than give advice in arenas that I'm not a professional. Like I am a black belt at jiu-jitsu, and so that's where so when people come up to me and they throw me a problem on the mat, somebody who I care about, who's a student of mine, and they're like, I'm really struggling with this at work or that, this, that, and the third. I'm like, look, man, like I can really help you like on the jiu-jitsu mat. I can help you like a little bit inside the gym, like lifting weights and stuff like that. But like some of that stuff, like, man, maybe you got to go see a therapist, and just like being open and honest with people and not just telling them like, hey, maybe you need to go see a therapist and then walking away, but sharing with them, maybe you need to go see a therapist. I know that I see one and it helps me a lot. And from my experiences, it's helped me grow. So it's like you're sharing a little bit of vulnerability with them and saying like it's okay to seek help in other arenas. I know we have this relationship, but like let's build some other relationships where you can also go and knock on those doors and get help where you need it. So have a financial advisor,
Yeah.
have a therapist, have somebody that is good with psychology, and hopefully that helps strengthen your bonds with the closest people around you too. So when they're struggling, you could not necessarily be the one who's with all the answers, but you can like remind them like, hey, sometimes you got to go outside the circle in order to seek help.
Yeah, and learning something in learning you have the opportunity to share it with someone else.
Yeah.
Again, with humility, doesn't mean you're
Yep.
a black belt, so to say, in that area. But I mean, if it works for you, it'll work for someone else, or you can at least try. And I think that's important. Is that you don't collect all these skills and these ideas so that you can keep it to yourself. No, you do it, and you learn, and you experience success, and you get to share it with others.
Yeah.
But again, humility, because you're not an expert, but everyone has their own 2 cents to offer in about a thing or two.
Yep. And I believe in this saying. It's kind of resonated with me since like probably like middle school or even high school, but like the right words can change your life. You don't know who's going to say it. You don't know when it's going to be said. It could be like 5 words, but like you just never know like what's going to resonate with you and what's going to change the direction of your North Star,
Yeah.
in the way you're trying to traverse through life.
Well, Daniel, I appreciate you coming on the show and having this conversation. I
Yeah,
really
man.
hope that people can learn from your experience, and uh, I'm now more interested in pursuing other avenues of learning, like jujitsu.
Yeah,
Maybe I
man.
got to get back in touch with my karate roots.
Yeah, man. No man should die without knowing the full potential of their body,
Amazing.
So don't waste it,
All right.
whether it's lifting weights or throwing punches at someone's face with pads on. You know? So you
Glad to
gotta,
have you on.
yeah, man. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely.